This is the most exciting and intriguing Hall of Fame ballot we've seen in a few years, and it's because of some notable newcomers, so let's just jump right in on those. And this group of newcomers is headlined by Adrian Beltre, and I hate to say it because people are probably really excited to hear me talk about Adrian Beltre, but Adrian Beltre, for the sake of this video, is not going to make for interesting content. He is a Hall of Famer. He is what I would call a slam dunk Hall of Famer. He is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. You know, if you're a sabermetric guy, oh my goodness, 93.5 WAR. Wow, that's good for 27th all time among position players. And then if you're a traditional head, a counting stats head, 3,166 career hits. Wow, that's good for 18th all time in all of baseball history. There's what else can you say here? You know, if you're an accolade guy, okay, you're going to focus on 5 gold gloves and 2 platinum gloves. If you're a, advanced defensive metrics guy, in terms of fielding runs, he's 5th all time behind only Andruw Jones, Ozzie Smith, Mark Belanger, and Brooks Robinson. So there's just really nothing else to say here. This is a beloved, unscandalized player who, had some inconsistency in his 20s and turned that into the model of consistency in his 30s. Will he be unanimous is truly the only interesting, discussion in terms of his appearance on the ballot. And I'm going to lean no. Someone's going to find some reason to leave him off. And maybe that reason will be he never won a World Series, in which case I'll say, great, leave him off and, eject Ted Williams from the Hall of Fame because that guy's a fraud too. But that's really it. The only possible interesting discussion here with Adrian Beltre is will he or will he not be unanimous? Otherwise, there's way more interesting newcomers to the ballot in terms of content. Next up is Joe Mauer, and this is where I think things start to get a little more interesting because I think among fans, I think among viewers of this channel, I think among people who view baseball similarly to how I view baseball, there's a very strong pro-Mauer sentiment. He's almost seen as a slam dunk in that same category that Beltre is. Obviously, Joe Mauer is a Hall of Famer, they say, and the argument can definitely be made pretty convincingly. I mean, look at these offensive numbers for a catcher. A career 306 average, 388 on base, 439 slug. That adds up to a 124 career OPS plus. That is 13th among catchers, or at least players who caught at least 800 career games. And that WAR, 55 WAR, that's a lot for a catcher. In fact, if you look at Jaws, which integrates both, his career WAR and the WAR of his peak season, so his 7 best seasons added up to 39 WAR, he is 7th in catcher Jaws. He's sandwiched between Yogi Berra and Bill Dickey, 2 of the all-time greats. So obviously, Joe Mauer is a slam dunk Hall of Famer. And yet, there's that part of me that says, look, an argument against him can be made, and the argument is pretty simple. If you look at his games played here, he made 885 starts at the catcher position, 888 starts between first base and DH. So I would put forth the argument, honestly, he didn't even quite play half his games at catcher. And so I've got a little bit of a beef with this. He had to switch off catcher because of injuries, particularly concussions. So I'm totally sympathetic to that. But if you look at these earlier in this first 2/3 of his career, let's call this about 9 or so seasons, he was basically Johnny Bench, right? And then for this stretch right here where he's just playing first base and he's, hitting 278 and he's got a 105 OPS plus, playing good defense at first base, but there's a huge difference between, the value of a good defensive first baseman and a great defensive catcher. He's 5 years of James Loney, and sort of the irony of this is the 5 years of James Loney type production are gonna help him get in because, they, for example, let him stick around long enough to reach 2,000 hits, which is an important milestone if you're trying to get into the Hall of Fame. So, for me, Joe Mauer was more talented than Yadier Molina, or I would say even Buster Posey. But I would probably rank Molina and Posey above Mauer in terms of Hall of Fame worthiness. because, Molina, obviously, he caught a ton more than Mauer. Posey still caught more than Mauer. And so, people are viewing Mauer as this all-time great offensive catcher, and I guess the only argument I can put against that is how much of a catcher was he really, if he was only a catcher, effectively for half of his career. So he's still a Hall of Famer for me. It's just that I'm not necessarily going to be like pounding my chest here. Like, it's not, there were points last year where people were submitting ballots without Scott Rolen on it. And it was like, oh, no Scott Rolen, bad ballot, disregard this person's opinion. And I don't necessarily feel that way about Joe Mauer. And look, I don't think he's going to have any trouble getting in. I don't know if it'll be first ballot, but I don't think he's going to exactly, scrape into the Hall of Fame in his final year. You get 10 years on the ballot, so he's got plenty of time to build up to reach that 75% threshold if it doesn't happen this year. So he's going to get in, but I'm just saying I don't totally see him as the slam dunk Hall of Famer that everyone else does, although I do see him as a Hall of Famer. I don't have doubts about that necessarily. Now it's time for Chase Utley. Now it's time for me to take a different tone. I, Foolish Bailey, feel very strongly that Chase Utley should be a Hall of Famer. And what they're going to hold against him is the counting stats. He did not get to 2,000 hits. There's not a great record of hitters getting into the Hall of Fame without reaching 2,000 hits, especially non-catchers like Chase Utley. Chase Utley was the second baseman. He did not become a full-time, everyday great player until he was 26. So that's one reason why he didn't necessarily accrue all those counting stats. But peak Chase Utley was unbelievable. Look at this run here from 2005 to 2009. He was worth at least 7 WAR in all 5 of those years. And if you look here, these are players with 7 WAR seasons since 1947, since integration. Chase Utley comes in with 5, all in a row, mind you, between 2005 and 2009. Look at this company he's with: Mantle, Frank Robinson, Joe Morgan, George Brett. And then everyone else ahead of them, everyone else with more 7 WAR seasons. I mean, this is simply a collection of, the greatest position players we've seen since integration. So, it's easy to put Chase Utley in that company just with some of those peak seasons he had. Chase Utley, a career 117 OPS plus hitter, by the way, as a second baseman. Here are all the Hall of Fame second basemen. He would slot in right here, right in the middle of this leaderboard in terms of OPS plus between Joe Gordon and Roberto Alomar. Defense was a big thing for Chase Utley. And this is interesting because Chase Utley somehow, someway, never won a Gold Glove award. And yet, if you go by fielding runs, so that's going to use total zone for the good old days, that's going to use, defensive runs saved for the newer days, so that's what Chase Utley's stat is here. He's 7th all time among second basemen. He's one of the greatest defensive second basemen of all time by those analytics, and yet no Gold Gloves. And this is where I start to really have beef with using accolades. Stolen bases as well. I want to point out stolen bases. He only stole 154. That's not a lot. I'll keep it real with you. But the efficiency is unparalleled. These are players with at least 150 stolen bases all time. He's first in terms of stolen base efficiency. He was successful on 87.5% of his stolen base attempts throughout his career. I think this is a no-brainer. I think this is a slam dunk. I think Chase Utley, clearly a Hall of Fame player, which is interesting for me. If you think about Mauer, right, like he in terms of like the character clause, he's such a plus to plus guy. He's so well liked. He's so well regarded. Same with Beltre. Utley, to be honest with you, just the way he played the game, like kind of a tool, But at the same time, if you're an old school Hall of Fame voter, right, you're probably going to like that. You're going to be like, he played hard. He slid hard in the second base. And then if you're a new school guy like me, maybe you won't really care about that at all. But you will care about, 65 WAR and only, under 2,000 games. And just look at his peak. He was just incredible. And the efficient base stealing and the defensive run saved and all that. So it's an interesting case. But to me, no matter what, Chase Utley is a very, very clear Hall of Famer. And I don't expect him to get in this year on the ballot, but to me, yes, absolutely yes. David Wright, another player who's an 80 on the 20 to 80 scale of popularity and likability. He's up there with Mauer and Beltre in that regard. David Wright, the whole kind of narrative on his career is, wow, David Wright was on a clear Hall of Fame pace, but then it just so happened that he played his last full season at the young age of 31, and then injuries, and his career ended. And it was just a very sort of, sad petering out. Oh, the back injuries. What could have been? He could have been a Hall of Famer. And now that he's actually here on the ballot, I think the same people who espouse that narrative are starting to think, well, unless he just is a Hall of Famer, unless he is just good enough. I mean, you can get in on a decade of being really, really productive, even if you don't do much else. So yeah, that's David Wright. That's the position he's in. Lacks the counting stats because of that. Again, not at 2,000 hits. And honestly, because of that, I thought that he and Utley were going to be pretty comparable coming into this. Second base and third base are roughly the same value on the defensive spectrum. They played at the same time. They were great at the same time. I thought they were immediately going to be pretty comparable. And if we head over to the StatHead player comparison tool, there's going to be a lot of StatHead in this video. Just let me cook. Code Foolish20. We can see Wright is well ahead of him in terms of the rate stats offensively. There's a significant difference here between 133 OPS plus and 117, although Utley had more, non-peak later on years. Like think about him on the Dodgers, for example. He was still a good player, but he wasn't, that peak we saw 2005 to 2009 when he was putting up hitting stats, comparable to, David Wright. But yeah, and the hits both under 2,000. But what's interesting here is there's a very clear separator in terms of their WAR, and that is the defense, because Chase Utley is plus 131 at second base. David Wright, negative 25 runs, according to the advanced fielding metrics, which surprised me. That is not the reputation he had in my mind, and I know I watched him when I was a kid in his prime. He was a good defensive third baseman. I wouldn't call him an all-time great, but he was certainly good. And he won two Gold Glove awards, although I've already kind of been on that Gold Glove rant. So I'm surprised to see that the defensive metrics did not like his defense at third base that much, and that's a big reason why he hasn't even cracked 50 WAR. In terms of WAR, by the way, we're looking here at third basemen through their age 30 season, sorted by WAR, and we can see David Wright is 11th here. He's tied with Scott Rollins. Scott Rollins just got in, and look at who he's ahead of. He was ahead of Adrian Beltre's pace. He was ahead of Chipper Jones' pace. He was ahead of Nolan Arenado and Brooks Robinson. So yes, you could definitely make the argument, hey, through about age 30 or so, clear Hall of Fame pace. But yeah, and what's tricky here for David Wright is just, did he play enough, right? Because he had 6,872 plate appearances. These are hitters since integration with under 7,000 career plate appearances. And, you can kind of disregard all these guys like Campanella and Robinson and Doby and Urban. They played in the Negro Leagues before that. And then the white players, they played pre-integration as well. So really the only guy with under 7,000 plate appearances to become a Hall of Famer is Tony Oliva. And that was through the Veterans Committee. So maybe that's the best case scenario for David Wright here, because I don't love his chances on the writer's ballot just because he probably didn't play enough by their standards. And I'm not even sure he played enough by my standards either. I think for me, honestly, it's a quintessential Hall of Very Good career from a Hall of Fame caliber talent. And there's a difference between, Hall of Fame talent and Hall of Fame production. I think he has the talent, but I don't quite think he has the production. So for me, that would be like a quintessential Hall of Very Good career. I'm willing to sort of evolve my stance on this issue. I imagine he will stay on the ballot for the long-ish term. That's sort of my guess. But yeah, that's the way I see the candidacy of David Wright. I do think it is that narrative where, yeah, he was on a Hall of Fame pace until about 30, and not necessarily, well, what if he did enough through 30 that we can just put him in anyways? So yeah, that's how I see David Wright. Bartolo Colon is my final notable newcomer to the ballot. I'll cover all the other newcomers later, so don't worry. But these are the guys who I think have at least a snowball's chance of sticking on the ballot, getting that 5% threshold, to make it for a second year. And the reason I think he's got a chance is 247 career wins. It was a classic stat accumulator type career. We've seen it with Jamie Moyer. We've seen it with Tommy John. There's guys like that. They're just going to accumulate the counting stats of a Hall of Fame player. And 247 wins is a lot of wins. The kids will always remember Bartolo Colon as the funny, chubby home run man later on in his career. He did win a Cy Young in 2005 with the Angels. To be honest with you, he didn't deserve it. That was probably Johan Santana's deserving year. Early on in his career, though, I mean, just a flamethrower, a freakish flamethrower with Cleveland. Hard to believe for some of you younger kids out there. But yes, that is very much the case. Does have a PED suspension on his record. That was when he was with Oakland. So that really, hurts his chances, as you can imagine, if people do remember that actually happened. But if we sort here by wins, these are pitchers not in the Hall of Fame, sorted by wins. You can see, we can kind of disregard Roger Clemens, right? Because, it's because of PEDs, but he's up there with some guys, right? Like, look at him and, Sabathia, who probably will get in. Look at him and Verlander, who's definitely going to get in. And then, I talked about Tommy John. I talked about Jamie Moyer. It's a pretty tight company here to win that many games, right? Not a lot of players have won as many games as Bartolo Colon, but do I think he's a Hall of Famer? I think it kind of goes without saying no. I don't think so. His career ERA starts with the number 4, for example, would be an argument against him. But fascinating career, Bartolo Colon. Again, for you kids out there, you'll just remember him as the funny, chubby home run man. So the next category of players on this ballot are who I would like to call the sabermetric darlings. These are players that are sometimes ignored by the more traditional Hall of Fame voters, but who a sabermetric type perspective of the game would paint as a Hall of Famer or could potentially paint as a Hall of Famer. We're going to start with Bobby Abreu here because I think Bobby Abreu is just happy to be here at this point. Unlike the next 3 after him, he is not a threat to reach that 75% threshold for induction, at least as things stand. There's not enough of an upward trend. He went from 9% to 9% to 15%, and he enters year 5, so he's probably going to stick around on the ballot, but there's very little chance he gets in. But man, sometimes, do you ever just go on Bobby Abreu's baseball reference page and say, if you're like me, you've probably gone to Bobby Abreu's baseball reference page and just said, 291 average, 395 on base, 475 slug, 400 stolen bases, plenty of counting stats, played 18 years, over 10,000 plate appearances, almost 2,500 hits. And that's kind of where I stand on it. I tend to vote for Bobby Abreu on the mock ballot just because it's kind of fun to keep him above 5% and keep the conversation going. That conversation might include things like, hey, here are players with 10,000 plate appearances and a 390 on base percentage since integration. Wow, what a great list of names. And then Bobby Abreu. He has 0 Hall of Fame vibes, but here he is. Or here's my most favorite, and this is sort of like the fun, platonic, ideal leadoff hitter, right? How about the 2,400 hit, 400 stolen base, 1,400 walk club? That's a classic club, but it's him, Ricky Berry, Joe Morgan, Eddie Collins. So, Bobby Abreu, 0 Hall of Fame vibes, but just sometimes I go on his page and I just say, that's a lot of walks. Now these next 3 guys are going through a much more crucial phase of the ballot because they all made great gains last year, and Rollins, who I would consider part of this crew, got in. And so the question for these guys right now, like Andruw Jones, like Todd Helton, like Billy Wagner, is how much will the strong crop of newcomers to the ballot slow down that progress? Because this is a more crowded ballot than there was a year ago. So in terms of Andruw Jones, he went from 34% to 41% to 58% last year, and now he heads into year 7. That's pretty good for him, right? But will the newcomers slow him down? The case for Andruw Jones, greatest defensive center fielder ever, 10 gold gloves, all in a row, just ridiculous numbers defensively at the center field position, and 434 career home runs. If I just told you, hey, the greatest defender all time at a premium up-the-middle position also happened to hit 400 home runs and is not suspected of using PEDs, wouldn't that be a Hall of Famer? Hey, what if this peak just so happened to be between 27 to 34 and not, 20 to 29? Would that change your mind at all? So, that's my look at Andruw Jones. I've kind of given that same spiel every year since he's been on the ballot. But, Andruw Jones, he should be in the Hall of Fame. Will he be? I'm starting to feel more confident, but this is an important year for him. Billy Wagner's heading into year 9 on the ballot. The limit is 10, so this is his second to last year on the ballot. Last year, he had 68% of the vote, which was a huge bump up from 51% the previous year, so he's on a good upward trend. The thing about Hall of Fame voters, and this has the potential to benefit Billy Wagner, is Hall of Fame voters, they're kind of cowards because they will absolutely leave you off for 9 years. For 9 years, they will say, he's not a Hall of Famer. And then when it gets to year 10, they'll be like, unless. So he's got a chance at that. There's a chance he doesn't make big gains this year, and then he gets the boost he needs to get over the finish line in year 10. But this is that crucial penultimate year on the ballot for Billy Wagner. As far as Billy Wagner's Hall of Fame case goes, he gave you 900 innings. He was a reliever. But man, his 900 innings, I'll take his 900 innings over anyone else's 900 innings except for maybe Mariano Rivera. Like, that's how dominant he was. I would recommend you all check out Jolly Olive's recent video on his Hall of Fame case. It probably puts into words better, his Hall of Fame case than I could right now. Todd Helton, man, he got really close last year. Last year, he went from 52% of the vote to 72% of the vote. You need 75 to get in, so he was really close to getting in. And the thing is, as he heads into year 6 on the ballot, you would generally expect any player that gets 72% the previous year to break that 75% threshold and get in. And I feel pretty good about Todd Helton's chances, but as I said before, there's some newcomers. They're making the ballot more crowded. And so it's just a general trend, a general question of if these sabermetric darlings can continue to make gains when the competition on the ballot is a little bit stiffer. Todd Helton played for the Colorado Rockies his entire career. You will know me as, many years ago, a guy who campaigned very heavily for Larry Walker. And Larry Walker sort of helped break that core stigma to some degree by getting in. But Larry Walker played 30% of his career games at Coors Field. Todd Helton played 50% of them. He was a one-club man. He did not play for the Expos and the Cardinals like Larry Walker did. And so, with Todd Helton, thankfully, even though he played in a very high offensive environment, we can look at a stat like OPS plus, which actually normalizes the league run environment so that 100 is always average, and we can say, hey, Todd Helton had a 133 OPS plus. Where does that stack up? Well, here are hitters with at least 9,000 plate appearances and an OPS plus of 130 or higher who are not in the Hall of Fame. And we can just go down the list here. Barry Bonds, Manny Ramirez, PEDs, A-Rod, PEDs, Sheffield, PEDs, Rafael Palmeiro, PEDs. Pujols is going to get in. Miguel Cabrera is going to get in. They're just not on the ballot yet. So really, it's Todd Helton remains, as a non-PED guy on that list. I think he's got a good chance to get in this year, but the only thing that might stop him is some of these newcomers because, people are going to be voting for Joe Mauer, and people are going to be voting for Adrian Beltre, and people are going to be voting for, hopefully, Chase Utley. So we'll just have to see. I like his chances this year, but I don't think it's guaranteed. This next section of players is scandalized players. These are players who in many cases are going to have Hall of Fame type numbers, but they have been scandalized in one form or another, and that's preventing them from getting in. And we're going to start with A-Rod. Now, A-Rod's first year on the ballot, he got 34% of the vote, and I thought, okay, that's fine. That's a fine start. And then his second year, which was last year, he got 36% of the vote, and I was like, uh-oh, he has not girl bossed enough. I've made a whole video about this on this channel. He needs to be a girl boss to get into the Hall of Fame. Hasn't done it enough. Does he have the Hall of Fame credentials besides the PED stuff? Absolutely. I mean, if you look at him just on the all-time WAR leaderboard right here, he's between Ted Williams and Lou Gehrig among all position players. This is a guy, you could easily make the argument, Alex Rodriguez is the greatest infielder to ever play the game of baseball. He was just so ridiculously good. But the thing about A-Rod is, and I do think this makes him different from, say, Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, who didn't get in either, is that he got caught with the PEDs when he really should have known better. The sport had already had its moment, had already had its reckoning, and he gets caught up in the biogenesis scandal after that, actually ends up serving a year-long suspension in 2014, which, Bonds and Clemens never did. And look, here's the thing. When I fill out my mock ballot towards the end of this video, I'm still going to vote for him because my sort of general rule is, if you're a steroid user, you have to be an all-time great to make it. And he is, by my personal standards, he's an all-time great. He's an inner circle Hall of Famer based on his statistics, so I will give him that vote. But he not only did he get caught using steroids, not only did he get embroiled within these scandals, he did so at a time when the game knew better and he simply should have known better. And another player in that should have known better category is Manny Ramirez. He was so much fun. He was a great player. He's not on the level of A-Rod if you look at him in terms of the complete package because he was a pretty big negative defensively. He didn't really steal bases, but he just mashed. He just raked like crazy. Look at him in terms of OPS plus among right-handed hitters all time. He's 11th. He's 11th. He's between Frank Robinson and Hank Aaron on this list. So that's the type of hitter Manny Ramirez was. But it only adds up to 69 WAR. Nice, because, again, the defense was pretty crappy. The thing about Manny Ramirez is just a massive steroid cheat, and I hate to use that word, but he was a cheat late in his career. This dude was basically addicted to getting caught using PEDs at a time when he should have known better. He was suspended for 50 games in 2009. He was suspended again in 2011, and that's twice in the should have known better era. I just don't think this is necessarily excusable behavior, especially considering he was not an A-Rod level producer. And look, I'm definitely more sympathetic to guys like Bonds and Clemens who were using when it was effectively the Wild West and the league was not testing and they were turning a blind eye. But Manny Ramirez was using when the league was not turning a blind eye towards this kind of thing, and he was suspended multiple times as a result. And I don't really know what to call that other than he was cheating. I mean, at a certain point, you have to say this is not excusable behavior. Manny Ramirez was a chronic cheater. But, it doesn't take away from the fun memories or, for the Red Sox fans loved him and Cleveland fans loved him. It doesn't take away the fun memories, but I'm saying, he got older and he was like, oh, I'm starting to lose it. I got to cheat. And you know what? That's going to keep him out of the Hall of Fame. And I think, you know what? It's all right. I don't love it, but it's all right. Gary Sheffield. Gary Sheffield is actually not from that should have known better era, but he was implicated in the Mitchell report and the Balco scandal like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. This is his final year on the ballot, and honestly, with guys like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, off of the ballot and not even being voted in by a veterans committee last year, I hate to say it for Gary Sheffield, his inclusion on the ballot is kind of pointless. These guys are in just a total holding pattern because if they didn't put those two in, no one's going to put Gary Sheffield in. And so someone is going to have to break the seal on these PED guys eventually if it's going to happen, and it's probably going to be a veterans committee voting in either Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens or both. Is he a Hall of Fame player statistically? Of course. He has 500 home runs. He has 2,600 hits. He has a career 140 OPS plus. Of course he is. It's the same with Manny Ramirez, right? But total holding pattern for these guys. They're going to get their votes that they usually get every year, but they're not going to make gains. And because of that, Gary Sheffield will not get in year 10. He will fall off the ballot, resign to the same fate as those who came before him. Andy Pettitte. Now, among the sort of PED crowd, he's somewhat unique because he admitted to doing it and he apologized profusely in public. And mind you, this was not like A-Rod where he got, suspended for a year and basically had to own up for it. Yes, he got caught, he got implicated in some stuff, but really he went out there, he said, yep, I did it, which, Bonds and Clemens never did. He framed it as injury recovery. And it's sort of a shame that happened because he would have been a really interesting statistical case if he was clean. I think especially considering his sterling playoff record. This is one of the greatest playoff big game pitchers ever. Alas, he is destined to scuffle, and that's sort of the fate for these PED guys on the ballot. They have their voters, but they aren't really going to accrue new voters the same way the SABR Darlings do. Carlos Beltran made his debut on the ballot last year where he gained 47% of the vote in year one. That is a very strong debut. That is the type of result you would expect for someone who's going to get into the Hall of Fame around year 3, 4, or 5 on the ballot. And yet, Carlos Beltran is also scandalized. He's not a PED user, or at least is not suspected of being a PED user like the guys we just talked about, but he is scandalized. So despite the fact, hey, for the sabermetric heads, here's a guy with 70 WAR who did everything great, played some nice defense out there in center, stole bases efficiently. Hey, for the counting stats guys, this guy had 2,700 hits and 400 home runs. Like, here's a pretty clear depiction of what a typical Hall of Famer is in the form of Carlos Beltran. Because of his involvement in that Houston Astros sign-stealing scandal, there are question marks surrounding his candidacy. Now, here's my thing. If I were a voter, I wouldn't really care. He was a player. It was something that happened in his last year. I know he won a World Series that year, and that's sort of seen as, the cap to his Hall of Fame career. But honestly, he was a Hall of Famer before he had that stint in Houston right at the end there where he won a World Series. He had just had a great career overall. And I think, here's a guy who's been treated kind of unfairly. I genuinely feel like baseball has treated this man unfairly. And I think about, the Mets hiring him to be their manager, and then they mutually part ways as soon as this scandal comes out. And I think, wow, Carlos Beltran's not a manager in Major League Baseball, and he was a player on that team. And yet I turn on the TV and A.J. Hinch is managing and Alex Cora is managing. Like, those guys were supposed to be in charge, Carlos Beltran, you'll remember when the original reporting on this scheme came out, it basically cited, there was a veteran hitter who sort of put the idea on the table and was a driving force in terms of getting this camera out there to steal signs electronically, which was against the rules. And that player is typically accepted as being Carlos Beltran, even though there's no evidence of that. It could have been Evan Gattis, for example. And so basically the idea is Carlos Beltran is being punished not just for his involvement in the scandal, but because he was somehow the mastermind of this scandal. And I'm here to say, look, dude, he was just a player. You guys probably need to get over this at this point. Altuve's on Hall of Fame pace, so if Beltran can get in here, that's going to give people permission to put in a guy like Altuve later. By the way, Altuve, I've said this before. If you look at the data in terms of the banks, he didn't really cheat. He was on a team that was cheating. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, that's Carlos Beltran. A different type of scandal for sure compared to A-Rod and compared to Sheffield and Manny Ramirez. And yet, here's my thing with Carlos Beltran that I think is really interesting. So he debuts at 47%, right? But what we've seen with these scandalized players is they have their guys who will vote for them, and they have their guys who won't, right? And so they don't make gains. They don't make, Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds did not make crazy gains throughout their time on the ballot. They had their guys who would vote for them. They had their guys who didn't, and that was pretty consistent year over year. So it's not like these sabermetric guys like Andruw Jones and Billy Wagner and Todd Helton who are getting fresh looks every year and they're gaining voters every year. It's a different case. So for Beltran, I think you've got to hope for gains this year. And I expect he will get in eventually, but, more crowded ballot, there's a chance that this is sort of a year of stagnation in terms of his Hall of Fame candidacy. We'll just have to see. I'm a big supporter of Carlos Beltran in the Hall of Fame simply because I think this whole process has been kind of unfair for him, and he clearly has, at least by my standards, Hall of Fame numbers. Go compare him to Andre Dawson. He was basically a slightly better version of Andre Dawson, and Andre Dawson's a Hall of Famer, and no one seems upset that Andre Dawson's a Hall of Famer. Omar Vizquel, back in 2020, he had some serious momentum in terms of his Hall of Fame candidacy. In his third year on the ballot, he eclipsed 50% of the vote. That boded very well for him. For example, Scott Rollins, it took him until his fourth year to break that 50% barrier, and he got in, getting 75+% in his sixth year. So he was clearly on the way, and the case was basically, hey, who cares about 82 OPS plus? Look at how many hits he has. Look at his Gold Gloves. Bam, Hall of Fame. And this is a lot of hits. 2,877 hits. That would be the most hits any unscandalized player would have to not get into the Hall of Fame. So yeah, he was clearly on his way, whether you sabermetric heads out there liked it or not. And then he quickly became scandalized. And because of this, his candidacy is completely dead in the water. So late in 2020, so this was mid-voting cycle, a lot of the writers had already submitted their ballots, and I think a lot of them probably would have liked them back. But his wife accused him of abuse of the physical nature. This was in late 2020. And then in August 2021, it came out that he had allegedly sexually harassed a bat boy who had autism. And if you read the details of this, they're pretty harrowing. They're pretty awful. So what we really have here with Omar Vizquel is misconduct in both his personal life, with regards to his wife, but also his professional life, with regards to things that took place at team facilities. And because of this, the campaign is totally dead, and that's fine. From a sabermetric perspective, he really didn't deserve it anyways, but from a human perspective, which is much more important, it seems like, and this is putting it extremely likely, but it seems like he sucks. He really sucks, and he, does not deserve veneration at all. So last year, only 20% of the vote. Again, that's down from 50% at peak, and I genuinely think those writers who are still voting for him, even though he statistically doesn't have a great case, even though all of these terrible things have come out against him, I think what's happening is those 20% just haven't gotten the memo. Like, does someone want to show them the newspaper or something? I don't know what to tell you. I think these guys are basically like the guys who were still fighting World War II in the 70s, Just stop doing this. Come out and try to reintegrate yourself into society. This next category of players doesn't really have a category. These are players on the ballot who are not new, they are not scandalized, and they are not SABR Darlings. They're just here right now. And we're going to start with Mark Buehrle because I am pro Mark Buehrle for the Hall of Fame in the sense that he was one of my favorite players ever. He has a whole video on my main channel dedicated to him. I love Mark Buehrle. He was sort of a picture of consistency. He did not really have a peak, a Hall of Fame peak. He did not win Cy Young awards. He did not have insane seasons, but he was just going to go out there and he was just going to pitch a good game for you. And so I think one way to describe Mark Buehrle is if we look at players in the modern game, and let's say the modern game is, divisional era since 1969, what does a great modern ace workhorse type pitcher give you? Well, you're going to want a guy who throws 200 innings and who has doesn't allow too many runs. So let's say an ERA plus above 120. If you look at guys with seasons like that, since 1969, I know this is like a really specific stat head search, code foolish20, but this is how I'm going to cook it up. Mark Buehrle had 8 such seasons. Like, that is significant. That is more than Greinke. That's more than Smoltz. That's more than Scherzer. That's more than, King Felix. That's tied with Curt Schilling and Roy Halladay. And all these guys ahead of him are Hall of Famers, except for Clemens, and, that's a different case. But yeah, that's Mark Buehrle. He just gave you, ace-like or ace-adjacent seasons. If you just sort by the WAR, look how many 4, 5, 6 WAR seasons he had. It adds up to 59 for his career. And I mentioned Andy Pettitte earlier, and it was such a bummer that Andy Pettitte, he's in this sort of steroid PED bucket because he has a really interesting case. And I actually think the version of Andy Pettitte that didn't, use steroids is probably Mark Buehrle, right? Because look how similar they are in terms of WAR. And the reason they're so similar in terms of WAR is simply they threw basically the same amount of innings, and they had basically the same ERA, and they had the exact same ERA plus. So, of course, that's going to add up to the same amount of WAR. They provided very similar value, at least in the regular season. So I have voted for Mark Buehrle during the mock balloting that I do in the past. Just to be very clear, not a Hall of Fame voter. I just fill out the ballot at the end of the video just to show you what I would do. He's not likely to get in, given that he has peaked at just 11%, and he's entering year 4. But I'm a Mark Buehrle fan. It's maybe not even the most rational opinion I have, but I'm going to keep voting for him if there is room on the ballot. Torii Hunter, I do this ballot breakdown every year, and I have said very little about Torii Hunter throughout this entire series. But guess what? He's still here for year 3. He got 7% of the vote last year, and he'll be interesting to watch because if he falls below 5%, he will fall off the ballot, and that might happen given the influx of new names. Writers can only vote for 10 players at a time, so he could fall by the wayside while, writers add guys like Maurer and Beltre to their ballot. So he's on the bubble here. I don't think he's got a really chance to get in at all, but, the interesting thing here for Torii Hunter is he going to stay on the ballot? Jimmy Rollins, thanks to past performance on the ballot, is in a more secure place than Torii Hunter heading into this year. He was extremely well liked, both on and off the field. He has the counting stats of a Hall of Famer to some degree because, hey, almost 2,500 hits. Hey, almost 500 stolen bases. He even has the accolades of a Hall of Famer. Hey, 4 Gold Gloves. Hey, an MVP award in 2007 that he probably didn't deserve, but that's okay. Jimmy Rollins, quintessential Hall of Very Good. The way I see the game, at least, the way I value players. Good chance he stays on the ballot for all 10 years of his candidacy, but never gets particularly close to getting in. Francisco Rodriguez, a.k.a. K-Rod, he got 10% of the vote last year in year one. That is respectable. I gotta think he is less of a threat to fall off, with a more crowded ballot this year than, say, Torii Hunter. Francisco Rodriguez, K-Rod, through his age 34 season, which, by the way, age 35 was his last season, but through his age 34 season, was the all-time save leader. He was on pace to be the all-time save leader. He had about 100 more saves than Mariano Rivera had through their respective age 34 seasons. And saves was pretty much the beginning and end of this Hall of Fame debate for him. It's kind of how you feel about the save stat, how do you feel about the role of relief pitchers and closers in Hall of Fame balloting in general. In 2008, he had 62 saves. That's the most saves anyone has ever had in a single season. And if you look at the career save leaderboards all time, I'll zoom in a little bit to make this a little bit easier for you to read. He is fourth, and everyone ahead of him, Lee Smith, Trevor Hoffman, and Mariano Rivera, are in the Hall of Fame. So that would be sort of the case for Francisco Rodriguez. It's interesting to me because to some degree there have been relievers on the ballot who have fallen off the ballot who is actually maybe more interested in, like maybe Joe Nathan was a little more interesting to me. Maybe even Tom Henke, who fell off way back in the day of Blue Jays fame, was a more interesting, maybe even more compelling Hall of Fame candidate for me. And honestly, if you want to compare him to another reliever on the ballot, to me, even though he doesn't, even though he has more saves than him, he's not as good as, say, Billy Wagner, and for that, from my perspective, then he's not a priority with Wagner so late in his tenure on the ballot. But again, he has the saves. And saves are a pretty strong predictor of Hall of Fame success for relief pitchers. So we'll have to see. I don't think I'll be voting him this go around just because it's a more crowded ballot. K-Rod, you can definitely make a case for, you can definitely make a case against, but I also think you can make a case against any relief pitcher not named Mariano Rivera. These are the rest of the newcomers to the ballot. These are the players who I don't expect to get 5% of the vote and stay on the ballot. These are the players who are colloquially going to be known as the one and dones. However, it is an honor to even be included on a Hall of Fame ballot. It's not like every player who plays 10 years is even included on the ballot, so there's a certain level of production needed to even appear. So it is an honor simply to appear on the Hall of Fame ballot, even if it's only for 1 year. So we're going to go through and we're going to say one nice thing about these guys. Jose Bautista, there's a lot of nice things you could say about him. Rule 5 draft legend, known for the bat flip. Also known for playing for 3 NL East teams in 2018, and then after that, trying to come back as a pitcher. But I want to really talk about this 7-year span here with the Toronto Blue Jays, where he was just hitting for a lot of power between 2010 and 2016. So a 7-year stretch, nobody hit more home runs in Major League Baseball than Jose Bautista. Put that in your stat head. Adrian Gonzalez, the quality of these newcomers and these supposed one and dones is pretty astounding. These guys were all great players. I can't understate that. These guys were all great players. They all had great careers, and I just want to take this time to celebrate them. Adrian Gonzalez, he was great with the Red Sox. He was great with the Dodgers. I want to talk about his tenure with the Padres because the Padres don't really have a rich history of power hitters. Starting to see some new ones come along like Tatis and Machado, but just historically over the course of the franchise, franchise, especially where they've played. Not a lot of power hitters. These are Padres hitters with at least 150 home runs and 20 career WAR in a Padres uniform. The only guys who have done it are Dave Winfield and Adrian Gonzalez. Matt Holliday, a lot of nice things I could say about Matt Holliday. I could even say, wow, your sons are also extremely good at baseball. Matt Holliday had a fun career. I think it's a fun example of, let's say pre-Nolan Arenado, and this is fun to say also in a year that Todd Helton might get into the Hall of Fame. A great example of, can he do it outside of Coors? Oh, yes, he can. He can immediately. He had absolutely no problem doing it outside of Coors. Career 131 OPS plus in Colorado, 138 with St. Louis. Matt Holliday retired with a tantalizing .299 career batting average, which means we can't quite consider him part of the 300 club, but we can form a brand new club through StatHead code Foolish 20. How about .299 average, 300 career home runs, and 2,000 hits? 27 guys have done it. Hopefully you can see those names. For the most part, these are Hall of Famers, for the most part. And Matt Holliday is part of their ilk. So great career, Matt Holliday. Hats off to you, and I'm excited to see what your sons will do. Victor Martinez, I wouldn't say these guys are my childhood, like, oh my gosh, Victor Martinez was my childhood, but I would say these guys generally are my teenage years, so there's obviously a lot of nostalgia whenever their names come up. Victor Martinez, catcher earlier in his career, hit well enough to stick around as a DH and first baseman because this dude could seriously rake. So let's look at hitters right here through the magic of StatHead. Hitters with at least 800 games at the catcher position and 2,000 career hits. Only 13 have done it. Victor Martinez is one of them, as is Joe Mauer. They're kind of similar in that regard in terms of the fact that, yeah, they were catchers, but they weren't totally catchers their entire career. But Victor Martinez was not a good defensive catcher the same way Joe Mauer was. So yeah, Victor Martinez, great career. Hats off to you. Brandon Phillips, that dude BP himself, we're going to hit him with a similar StatHead search. We're looking here at second baseman with at least 2,000 career hits and 200 stolen bases and 200 homers. Not a lot of them have done it, but Brandon Phillips has, and the only other second baseman to hit those three marks, Craig Biggio, Ryan Sandberg, Joe Morgan, Roberto Alomar, all those guys are in the Hall of Fame. Jose Altuve, probably on his way. Jose Reyes, great player, played along David Wright, who's also on this ballot for many years. Jose Reyes, look at some of these stolen base totals, especially earlier on in his career. These are some insane seasons. He stole 78 bases in 2007. And because of that, if we go on StatHead here, we can look at stolen bases combined between 2005 to 2008. He absolutely lapped the competition. 258 stolen bases in 4 years. That's 40 more than second place Juan Pierre. That's about 70 more than third place Sean Figgins. So just a total speedster, total burner on the base paths. Jose Reyes. James Shields, big game James. I know some of you have a big smirk on your face already. You're probably remembering a couple funny things that happened to him in 2016, specifically Bartolo Colon hitting a home run off of him and then him being traded from the Padres to the White Sox for Fernando Tatis Jr. Hilarious, right? I get that. But this is a James Shields respect channel. This channel loves and respects Big Game James because Big Game James was the Chad innings eater. And I'm not talking about a Chad innings eater. I'm talking about the Chad innings eater. Look at this innings pitched column here, 200 innings every year between 2007 and 2015. That column is featured in the original Chad innings eater meme. And let's focus in here on 2011, because in 2011, he threw 11 complete games for the Tampa Bay Rays. That was the last time anyone ever threw double-digit complete games in a season. You can see here, since 2011, here are the most complete games in a season. Hasn't happened since Big Game James. And just with the general trend of pitcher usage in Major League Baseball, I think you could make the argument he's going to be the last pitcher ever to throw double-digit complete games in a season. Like, that is a pretty cool legacy. Way to go, Big Game James. You're not just a funny meme because of Bartolo and Fernando Tatis Jr. It is time for me to fill out my mock 2024 Hall of Fame ballot, emphasis on the word mock. I am not a member of the BBWAA. I am not a Hall of Fame voter. If I continue to be a YouTuber, there is a good chance I will never be a member of the BBWAA, and I will never be a Hall of Fame voter. I am only doing this so I can entertain you, and then you can yell at me in the comments. That's the only reason I'm doing this. So here are the 10 players I'm voting for. And yes, you can only vote for 10 players. That is the limit. Some guys will fill out a blank ballot. Some guys will vote for no players. These people are what we call desperate for attention. But anyways, let's fill out our ballot and let's go alphabetically here. I'm going to start with Bobby Abreu. Now, I've voted for Bobby Abreu typically on this ballot, and the whole idea is let's just keep him around and see what happens. He has interesting statistical qualities that are adjacent to the Hall of Fame or reminiscent of the Hall of Famer, and yet zero vibes. No one ever watched Bobby Abreu play baseball and thought, yes, I am watching a future Hall of Famer. Future Hall of Famer Bobby Abreu. No one ever really had that thought at the time, but I am entertained by putting him on this ballot nonetheless, so I'm going to go for him to start things off. Next, I'm going to go for Carlos Beltran, and I want to apologize for my ranting and rambling when I originally talked about him in this video. It was a little disorganized, but hopefully you got where I was coming from. He has a very clear statistical case to make the Hall of Fame, and I do just generally think as the years go on, this Astros scandal will sort of fade into the distance, and I also think he's just sort of been hard done by the game. I think he should be a big league manager, and he just kind of inexplicably isn't. And I also think, you know, he was a player on that team. He kind of gets treated like he was a coach. He kind of gets treated like he was the mastermind. He kind of gets treated like he's the only reason they did this, and it's just kind of speculation at a certain point. So I'm voting for Carlos Beltran. He had a great career before any of that happened anyways. So yes, Carlos Beltran, my second check mark. My next vote, alphabetically, as you may have already guessed, goes to Adrian Beltre, who, with all due respect to his amazing career, does not make for interesting content in terms of this video, because he is a slam dunk, easy, set and forget Hall of Famer, and I think pretty much every writer who gets a ballot is going to feel the same way. So the only question here really is, will he be unanimous? My fourth selection is Mark Buehrle. Mark Buehrle, like Bobby Abreu, I have generally voted for him whenever I do this exercise every year, and it's sort of the same thing, right? I don't think people necessarily watched Mark Buehrle at the time and thought, I'm watching a future Hall of Famer, but an interesting statistical case can be made. I'm the guy that's going to continue to make it year after year. He gets the vote, as did Bobby Abreu. My next mock ballot vote alphabetically goes to Todd Helton, and I really hope this is the year Todd Helton gets into the Hall of Fame. I generally have a pretty good feeling about that, and I gotta admit, I was actually kind of a later convert to the Todd Helton Hall of Fame case, because at the time I was really focused on Larry Walker. I was kind of had Todd Helton on the back burner in the back of my mind, and I don't even think I looked at how great some of his park adjusted numbers are. So I apologize for that. I haven't always had Todd Helton. I haven't been Todd Helton since day one, but I've been Todd Helton the last few years, and he was at 72% last year, so hopefully this is the year he breaks 75% and he gets into Cooperstown. Next up is Andruw Jones, who I have been all in on since day one. I, of course, grew up a Braves fan, so there's a little bit of personal bias there. But Andruw Jones, I've said it once, I'll say it again, greatest defensive center fielder of all time, 434 career home runs. You know, it's not quite adding up here for me. Can we get him into the Hall of Fame, please? My seventh selection goes to Joe Mauer in his first year on the ballot, and I hope I wasn't too harsh on him. I kind of shared my take about this on Twitter earlier, and I basically had a lot of Twins fans being like, hey Bailey, have you considered that you're the worst person ever, and that I hate you for even suggesting that he's not a total, complete slam dunk Hall of Famer? Look, I'm still voting for him, and to be honest with you, whether I'm right or wrong, you're still going to keep watching this garbage. Number 8 is Alex Rodriguez, the girl boss himself. It's kind of a futile effort at this point. I mean, Barry Bonds didn't get in, Roger Clemens didn't get in. Alex Rodriguez is going to continue to get 30, 40, 50% of the vote, but no real shot to get in. No real positive forward momentum for his campaign, despite all of his girl bossing. My 9th selection goes to Chase Utley. Baseball writers, please, just get this one right. I don't ask that you do it in his first year on the ballot, because unlike you, I don't care about the difference between a first ballot Hall of Famer and a 10th ballot Hall of Famer. I'm just saying, give him a good, strong first year, set him on the right course to later induction, just get him in, please. He was a Hall of Fame player. And finally, to wrap things up, is a player who got 68% of the vote last year, but is running out of time. This is his 9th year on the ballot. Billy Wagner, one of the all-time great relievers. I'll take his 900 innings against anyone's 900 innings, asterisk, except for maybe Mariano Rivera. So that is my 10. That is the limit. Feel free to yell at me in the comments below and tell me that I should drive my car into a river. Now, as an update to last year, there were 3 players I voted for last year that I didn't vote for this year. One of them was Scott Rollins, who got in. Great. One of them was Jeff Kent, who fell off the ballot, did not get in. And one of them was Francisco Rodriguez, aka K-Rod. He's sort of a victim of the 10-player limit in this case. Not a priority for me, with guys like Joe Mauer new on the ballot, and guys like Adrian Beltre new on the ballot, and guys like Chase Utley new on the ballot, and Billy Wagner getting to those crucial final years. So sorry, K-Rod. You know, in a weaker ballot, in a weaker year, he probably gets my vote, but not this year. So now it's time for predictions. I've given you my opinion. I've told you how I would fill out my Hall of Fame ballot, but now it's time for me to analyze, really get inside the mind of a typical Hall of Fame voter to determine what I think ultimately is going to happen during this round of balloting. We'll start with Gary Sheffield, as it is his final year on the ballot, and I'm just going to tell you right now, he ain't getting in. He ain't getting in. Roger Clemens didn't get in. Barry Bonds didn't get in. He's in the same category, just less impressive career overall. There's no forward momentum as far as his candidacy. He's not going to get a year 10 bump the same way a lot of players who are perceived as clean are going to. So yeah, no shot Gary Sheffield gets in. Sorry to all the Gary Sheffield enjoyers out there. Okay, now for Adrian Beltre, obviously he's going to get in, but the question is he going to be unanimous? And my opinion is no. I think 1 or 2 people will leave him off. Let's say he gets, easily 95% of the vote, but I don't think he's going to get to that full 100. They're going to hold something against him. There's going to be a guy who's like, oh, I don't think anyone on here is a Hall of Famer because they played during the steroid era. Or there's going to be a guy who's like, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer because he didn't win a World Series. Or there's going to be a guy who's like, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer because he wouldn't let Elvis Andrews touch his head. There's always some sort of reason. There's always some sort of weird gripe or grandstanding. I don't know how to describe it, but I genuinely think the next unanimous Hall of Famer will probably be Albert Pujols. That's sort of the way I see it. So Adrian Beltre, let's say 95+% easily, but I don't think he gets that full 100. Obviously, he's getting in first ballot, and that's what's going to be what's fun. Todd Helton, he got 72% of the vote last year. Can he get up to 75 in what is ultimately a much more crowded ballot? I think so. I think Todd Helton gets in this year. He has a lot of positive forward momentum in terms of his candidacy, and I think this is the year Todd Helton will enter the Hall of Fame alongside Adrian Beltre. Now, in terms of the other sabermetric darlings, Billy Wagner and Andruw Jones, those guys have also been making big gains, but I think this year we'll see more modest gains. So we will see modest gains. Billy Wagner, he's got a chance to break 70% here without getting in. I think he'll be kind of a borderline guy the same way Todd Helton was last year. So I think it's modest gains for Andruw Jones and Billy Wagner as they get, closer and closer to that 75% threshold. I don't think they get in. I think it's modest gains compared to what they've done the past few ballots. We've talked about Beltre getting in, but I think as far as the rest of the newcomers go, I don't think anyone else will get in. I think Beltre will be a first ballot Hall of Famer in this class, and that'll be it. So I think among the newcomers, I think Joe Mauer will probably get the second most votes. I think Chase Utley will probably get the third most votes. And I think David Wright will probably get the fourth most votes, with obviously Adrian Beltre leading the way. I think they'll all stick around. David Wright is maybe closer to borderline in terms of that. But I think Utley and Mauer, they put up respectable vote totals here. They get themselves into a position to hopefully get in later. I'm really hoping that for Utley, as you can imagine. Mauer, I think, doesn't have as much to worry about. He will get in. It's just simply a question of when. So again, basically, I think Joe Mauer gets in pretty comfortably. It's just not going to be on the first ballot. I think Chase Utley might get in by the skin of his teeth, but he might have to wait for like the 8th or the 9th or the 10th ballot. So it's going to be sort of a longer, more arduous candidacy for him. And then David Wright, as far as this year goes, I think he gets to 5%. So I think he sticks around, but I don't think I can say the same for Bartolo Colon. I don't think he'll stick around. I think he'll fall off this ballot. And then finally, one last prediction, and I think it's kind of going under the radar a little bit here, but I think Torii Hunter is in severe danger of falling off with the newcomers like Maurer and Beltre and Utley and Wright attracting a lot of attention. So I'm going to say Torii Hunter, who got 7% of the vote last year, I think he falls below that 5% threshold, and this is his final year on the Hall of Fame ballot. It is now time for my annual shout out of the Baseball Hall of Fame Vote Tracker, headed by Ryan Thibaudeau and co. This is basically a tool that's going to give you a preview of the results. You don't know the exact results, but a preview of the results before they are announced next month in January to find out who could possibly be joining Jim Leyland, more on him later, in this year's Hall of Fame class. So just a preview. The 400-ish writers who vote on this every year have no obligation to make their individual votes public, and yet many do. About half of them will before the total results are announced. And again, this Hall of Fame tracker team, led by Ryan Thibaudeau, what they do is they tally up those public votes. And what you'll see is sometimes players have big splits between the private votes and the public votes. So, the guys who are more open to publishing their ballot, maybe they're more proud, maybe they're better at voting, maybe they're going to be more likely to vote for the SABR Darlings, like Billy Wagner or Todd Helton or Andruw Jones. So sometimes those guys have big splits, like Todd Helton, and granted, this is only through 19 votes, so it's a very small sample size. Todd Helton sits at 90%. He's not going to get 90% of the vote this year. We're hoping he gets like 76% of the vote this year. So, that's not the goal right now. But go check it out, especially as the weeks drag on and more public votes are added to the tracker, because you can at least get a preview, at least somewhat of an idea as to what is going to happen before the results are announced next month. And so what's interesting for me here, as I've already made my predictions, is I'm kind of flying blind a little bit, because I can only go off 19 public ballots with only, that's only 5% of the total electorate. And as a result, I can't really draw any significant conclusions from any of the data here. But as we get closer, you might be able to. So the question is, who will be joining Jim Leyland in the class of 2024? Because Jim Leyland has already been elected. He was elected via a veterans committee during the winter meetings this year. Now, last year when I published this video, I was actually able to go through that year's veterans committee vote, which was on players, and give my opinions on each player. And I actually got one part of my prediction right, which is that Fred McGriff got in. Now, I did not make a prediction. Again, Jim Leyland, the vote has already happened. He's in. But I am really stoked that Jim Leyland got in because of all the managers and executives and umpires on this ballot. He was sort of my guy. He was the guy I wanted to see get in, which was interesting because Jim Leyland was not the best manager on this ballot by total wins. He was not the best manager on this ballot by World Series wins or winning percentage, but he was my personal pick, and I'm super stoked he got in with 15 of the 16 votes on the Veterans Committee. And honestly, besides Lou Piniella, who got 11 out of 16, so he just missed, none of the executives or umpires got particularly close. So, congratulations to Jim Leyland. In addition to winning a World Series with the Marlins, won a pennant in both leagues, which is a really cool accomplishment. And also, I think this is a nice little bonus, managed Team USA to their first and so far only World Baseball Classic win. And finally, I've got to say, this is my last video of the year. This is the last video you'll see from me in the calendar year 2023. It has been a little bit tumultuous year for the Foolish Baseball and Foolish Bailey brand, mostly because it started with my main channel, Foolish Baseball, getting hacked by Elon Musk himself. If you know, you know. So I'm going to take this time to point out, I do have a Patreon. You can join for $5 a month and get access to a lot of exclusive content, especially exclusive content that has been backlogged. So for example, in November, I did a Q&A, and these Q&As are typically about an hour to an hour and a half, and I have dozens of them. So there's just hours and hours and hours of exclusive Foolish Baseball content on the way. I also give updates, work in progress updates on what I'm working on. And when I don't do a Q&A, I will do, some sort of exclusive video content instead. So here's one I did about Grayson Rodriguez in September. So yeah, please check out the Foolish Baseball Patreon. I will point out, you can just join and then your card won't be charged until the first of the month. So what you can do is you can just join, check out what's on there for a few days, see if you like it or not, and then if you don't like it, just cancel. But yeah, it's been a tricky year for the Foolish Baseball and Foolish Bailey brand, and I really appreciate my patrons who have been a source of consistency for me in what have been inconsistent times. So thank you all for watching this. Thanks for watching the 2024 Hall of Fame Ballot breakdown. I will see you in the new year.